So, hello everyone, welcome to the Wookieecast. I'm sitting down with Lydia Kang, and she is one of the authors that's working on The High Republic and also several of the short stories within that, as well as Cataclysm. And so, hello, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. Yeah. So I'm Lydia, and my gosh, I write a lot of different books. I write nonfiction and historical fiction, um, medical stuff, and I'm also a practicing physician part-time. I live in Omaha, Nebraska, and I have been writing for Star Wars for several years now. So it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Do you remember the first project that you wrote for Star Wars?
Yes. So I wrote the short story Right Hand Man, which was in the anthology The Empire Strikes Back from a Certain Point of View, the 40-year anniversary. So that was several years ago now. And that was the first thing I ever wrote for Star Wars. And I was really nervous and very, very scared to write that story. But that's where it all began.
What character did that focus on? So, that was a short story about, um,
I'm
do you,
sorry, that's my dog hacking
all
in the
good.
background. I think he's got allergies, so I apologize if you hear these random hacks and snorts in the background. It's Sawyer. Um, so the story centers around 21B, who's a surgical droid. You see him a couple times in The Empire Strikes Back. You see him on Hoth when Luke is attacked and he's in the Bacta tank. You also see, I think, uh, one of the other medical droids around FX7, and then you see him at the end of the movie when Luke is having his cybernetic hand placed on. Um, the reason why I chose him was when I got asked to do something for the anthology, and they explained sort of what the anthology. I'd heard about the anthology and the first one that had come out, and I thought it was just like so clever, the title and from a certain point of view and all that. And they said, they didn't come to me and say, we want you to write the story. They just said, would you like to write for the anthology? And so it was really up for me to be like, well, what was in the movie that really struck me that I would love to just take that moment, take that character and expand it into this own little side story. But before I even got there, I was like, I was afraid to write it at all because I hadn't written anything for Star Wars. And I honestly had not read extensively in the universe at all. Like I had read very little. And so I just was really nervous that there was this gigantic fandom out there that was just ready to descend and attack anything that I would write and rip it to pieces if I didn't do it the right way. So I was really nervous because I have a lot of respect for the Star Wars universe. I've loved it my whole life. And because I had so much respect for it, I was like, I'm not going to do this unless I can do a really good job. And I'm not going to do this unless I can get all the details right. And I just do it with the sort of care and thoughtfulness that it deserves. And so I was like, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do a terrible job. I've told this story a couple of times, so I apologize if you've heard this before, but my husband, who's also a huge Star Wars lover, I told him I'm like, they want me to write the Star Wars. And he was like, well, you're going to say yes, right? And I was like, no, I'm actually going to say no. Cause what if I get it wrong? And what if I don't do a good job? And he's like, that is just silly. He's like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. How could you say no? And so then I paused on hitting my my email about saying no. And I thought a little bit more about this movie, which happens to be my favorite Star Wars movie. And I thought, well, what character would I even begin to write? What character could I possibly write from this movie that I would feel comfortable or I could imagine, a short story about? And as I started thinking, like going through the sort of like the scenes in my head, and the 21B scene came up, I was like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. Of course I could write from 21B. I'm a physician. The droid is a physician. We have a particular point of view that most people don't understand. unless you work in healthcare, unless you've been like a medical provider for somebody. And I was like, that I can do. I was like, that is something that I feel very close to. And I don't have to really worry about dissecting what's going on in 2-1B's head. Granted, it's a droid, which I get, and a medical droid and a human practitioner are very, very different entities. That being said, I would know enough about what was going on. And I just tried to imagine myself. I tried to imagine putting myself into the cybernetic feed of 2-1B. And if I was treating Luke, what would be going through my head? What would I be seeing? What would be going through Luke's body and his facial expressions that would make me want to help him? And as soon as I thought of that, I was like, okay, I can write the story. I was like, I can confidently write the story. I may not get all the details right about all the little bits and pieces about, the Star Wars, the details and the background, but I'll get help for that. And so I said yes. And then I wrote Right Hand Man, and I was very, very proud of that story, because it really kind of came from my love of Star Wars, but also from a lot of the very important things that I hold dear as a doctor. So yeah, that's how that happened.
You said that Empire Strikes Back was your favorite movie, so you've had Star Wars in your life for a really long time, I'm assuming. Was that one of the first movies you saw? Perhaps I'm not sure if you would have seen it when it came out, but like, growing up
Yeah,
with it, perhaps.
I did. So I am actually old enough to say that I saw A New Hope in the theater when it came out. I was 7 years old. No, I was 6 years old. It came out in 77. So I was 6 years old. So I do remember I went to the theater with my dad, my family, and I saw that movie. And I have very vivid memories of Luke wearing the orange visor and sort of bouncing around in his like X-Fighter and like, the very last run. And I remember being very stressed out and being like, oh my God, like, are they going to make it or not going to make it? So that's my very first memory of Star Wars. We're seeing it in the movie theater, which does age me a little bit. I get that. But I grew up with Star Wars in my life after that. It was just a piece of pop culture that was constantly around me. Um, Growing up in the 1980s, every Christmas and every Thanksgiving, they would put the movies on TV, and I would be sitting there watching every single one of them. And so I watched them countless times, to the point where everything was just memorized after a while. And then I met my husband in graduate school, and we were like huge Star Wars fans. And we would, there was this time where they were selling, like, I think it was like Burger King was selling these itty bitty miniatures of like all the characters in Star Wars. And we were constantly going to Burger King. We ate way too much fast food in medical school because we were trying to get every single toy that was coming out every week. And we have them all now. I have the whole collection. Must be from like the late 1990s. But yeah, so we have always, every time there's been a new movie, we get super excited. We go see it. And so yeah, it's just been always a part of my life. And I think that there are different depths of fandom that people have. But I can't say that, there wasn't a year of my life where there wasn't something important going on that I wasn't really excited about, something in Star Wars, or just getting really pumped up about, new movies coming out, and um, you know, new streaming stuff and things like that. So yeah.
So, in more recent years, it's been the High Republic's grand multimedia project that spans all types of different things: short stories, adult novels, junior novels. Um, and you became part of that during phase two. So, how did you first get into High Republic initially?
So it was the same thing that happened with the anthology. We got an email reaching out to my agent, who then reached out to me, and they offered if I would be interested in writing in phase two of the High Republic. And I did the same thing. I did the first round, and I was like, I can't do this. I was like, well, a short story is one thing, but like a novel, a whole novel,
Yeah.
and really new but very, very complex world. Um and yeah, once again, my husband was just like, are you bananas? Of course you have to say yes. And so I did, being very hesitant and very, very worried. But, everybody on the team who work in the High Republic are so fantastic. The authors have been incredibly welcoming to me. They answer every ridiculous question that I ask. They have been super supportive. Mike Siglain is just a superstar. When his vision and how he thinks, and the original Luminous authors, like everybody's been wonderful. And so I just got really sort of swept up in it, immersed myself in it. And I don't know exactly why they chose me. I'm just very happy that they did. And I am really proud of the work that I've been doing with them in the High Republic.
So Cataclysm, it does serve as sort of a sequel to Convergence. They're very closely tied together.
Yeah.
And that was written by Zoraida Cordova. So did you guys work together at all when you were writing the novels?
Yes, we did. And I had to work a lot with George Mann. So George Mann, wrote the audiobook that spans a period of time between Convergence and Cataclysm. But I also had to work really, really closely with Cavan Scott. So Cavan Scott was writing his YA and Path of Vengeance, and his was happening at the same time as what was going on in Cataclysm. And so we had to make sure that story beats matched up. And all the time. So there was a ton of conversations happening all the time, a lot of meetings. And so Zoraida and I definitely talked a lot, but most of what we talked about was that, Zoraida was going to, we had to make sure that the characters that Zoraida had were going to show up appropriately in Cataclysm, and any new characters that I had in Cataclysm were going to show their heads in like Convergence if necessary. And so we had to have some of those things match up. But a lot of it was really just me reading Zoraida stuff and riffing off what she had already built. So the characters of, making sure that, like the characters from Irem and Arano matched personality wise on the page what was going to happen in my book. So this is something I've never done before. I've never collaborated with another author on a series or anything like that, where I had to be like, I got to make sure the voice is the same. Like that's a hard thing to do. And I had to make sure that I was continuing these character arcs that were going to sort of escalate and change and evolve. So yeah, there was a ton of collaboration happening for sure.
I,
Some of it was more difficult, I think, with Cav, just because we were writing at the same time.
it's the
And
exact same battle, so you
it
had to
was
make
the
sure it
same
matched.
battle. Yeah, exactly. So if Cav changed something, I had to make sure it worked for my novel. And like I made this one huge mistake, which is really hilarious in retrospect. But we had decided very early on that there was going to be rain, like this huge storm that happened, and it's a big part of the plot in the battle at Dalna. And I totally forgot that it was going to rain, and so I wrote the whole novel with no rain in it. And Cap's like, it's raining, like there's a flood, like this is a big deal, like the catacombs or whatever you call it, like they like flood. And I was like, oh shoot, not catacombs, the underground area. And so I had to not rewrite the book, but I had to revise the book and put all the rain scenes in it and change it so that they were fighting in a muddy, dark, raining environment, which was really just awful, just a terrible way to fight any kind of battle. Yeah, I had to put that in afterwards. And it was like, and I had to do it in a way that didn't look like I like added it on. I had to make it work seamlessly with every single scene. And the characters were dripping, and they can barely see through sheets of rain, and there's mud, and it's mucky, and it's awful. And then the rain sort of ends towards the end of the battle, which is obviously a kind of a metaphor. So that was a big mistake. It was such a pain to fix. I just had like this sinking feeling when I remember I was either texting Cav or we were messaging, and I just remember being like, oh God, I have made a massive mistake.
And it's something that's so small, but yet it requires a lot of small changes. So
It was both small and enormous at the same time, and it took an enormous amount of time to fix that problem that I had created for myself. So but it was good. I mean, like, you learn from your mistakes, and sometimes when you're collaborating with people and you're having meeting after meeting after meeting, like some things get lost, some things get dropped, and you forget about them. And like this was sort of my this was sort of like a nice little slap on the wrist for me to remember, like, take better notes, like remind yourself better when these things happen. But it's a collaborative multimedia projects like this. They're complicated. They're super complicated. There's a lot of conversations that have to happen.
I know that myself and a lot of my friends, we really noticed a lot of details like, oh, Monarch Albrand is a bit of a grouch, and some things definitely made it over from book to book. So,
Yes, yes.
um, but one of the things that we also noticed was that Axel is a really emotionally complex character. He's just struggling. I mean, he starts out in prison. Um, but what was your favorite part about writing him, his struggle throughout the book?
Axel, poor Axel. Oh, Axel, our problem child. He he's so not like me in a lot of ways. He's constantly making the wrong choices. He's constantly making decisions based off of his emotions. He's making decisions based off of his insecurities. He's making decisions off of traumas that he's had and loss and voids he's trying to fill. And so from a writer perspective, he's a fantastic character, right? Because he's so flawed. And so you really get to just lean into his flaws and like let him make mistake after mistake after mistake. But there has to be something. The reason why you sort of love him and you get so frustrated is because there is that goodness in him, right? I think it's what keeps us watching in Star Wars. It's a running theme of this universe is that spark of good is what keeps you going. It's what keeps you turning the page. It's what keeps you hoping for something better. And that's what Axel has, right? He's a scoundrel,
He
but
has a good heart deep down because he saves people at the end of Convergence, but then he just runs off and becomes part of the path, and then his mother, and then he
yeah,
tries, but
yeah,
also he
exactly.
fails.
Exactly. He tries and he fails. Like he has that little bit of goodness in him. And his conscience is constantly being pushed by these outside forces that are telling him, like, they're sort of like, offering these things. They're sort of like, oh, look at this, like, look at this hoard of gold. Like you can have it if you do these bad things. And he's sort of like, he's taken by it and he pushes his conscience away to get the things that he thinks that he wants. But I think that's something that I think it's a very human element to him. I think that every single person is very easily swayed by the flashiness of the world of, follower accounts and social media. And this person has that person and I want that. And like, and I think that ultimately like the good part of yourself gets sort of pushed to the side when you're given the opportunity to take things that could be give you immediate gratification but ultimately don't give you like the gratification that you need in your soul, right? So that's his journey, is finally listening to the conscience.
I guess
um
because he's always had infinite money, so it's just what are you there to live for? You have all the material needs and wants. So
yeah, yeah. And it's it's a time as old as forever, is like time as old as forever. It's a story as old as time is what I'm trying to say. I really need a little bit more coffee. That money does not buy happiness. So I think he's thinking power buys happiness, and right, and then he'll figure out whether or not that's actually true. So
meanwhile, his mother has all of that power and she gives it up. Another human aspect, a mother's love, just unbreakable. What was writing that like?
yeah, that was so much fun. I enjoyed writing Kyung's character so much. I felt her very, very deeply when I was writing her character. And so much of this is, I know a lot of this is sort of like a maternal thing. I'm a mother of 3 children. I am a daughter of parents, immigrant parents, and I get what it means to sacrifice for your kids. But I think that anybody who has been in a loving relationship understands that sometimes um, there may come a time where you have to sacrifice something in order to help somebody else, and those sacrifices can be some of the largest ones of your life. So writing her character where she is somebody who is quite possibly the leader of the free galaxy, as we say, along with, Chancellor Mallow, And being like, at one point in time, does the sake of millions and millions of beings who are under your care become more important than the one family member that like you're supposed to take care of? It's this impossible choice. And so I decided to give her the impossible choice and just sort of see what she did. And it wasn't really obvious to me. Like, it's really weird. It kind of almost wrote itself. It was sort of like, oh, she's going to give up the chancellorship. And I remember being like, is that the right? I was like, Hyun, are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah, everyone else around her
The
was
right
like, "Are you
thing to
sure
do?
you want
Like,
to do this?"
I was like, I don't know if that's a great choice. I mean, you are like, there are all these people, like their lives are, you're under your care. Like you have so much power to do good. And isn't the good of the masses more important than the needs of a single person? And I actually really struggled with that. And I wasn't sure if she made the right decision. But strangely enough, like when I was trying to figure out what was going to happen in the story, it was really clear to me that she was going to do that. And I had issues with it. I was like, I don't know if that's a great choice, to be honest. I think that sometimes you have to let somebody make their mistakes and deal with the punishment that comes with that. But she makes this decision, as it is. It's got positives and it's got negatives, but she decided, and she's a strong lady, and I don't know exactly why she made that decision, but she did. I know it's kind of weird because people are always like, oh,
I guess
characters make the
there is
decision. No,
another chancellor, so that
yeah,
might have helped a little bit because the galaxy's entirely leaderless, you know.
exactly. The galaxy wasn't entirely leaderless. She and Orlin had butt heads just a little bit, but not so much. And I think she just sort of like knew it was just the right thing to do, and that for her and possibly for the galaxy. Because the other thing was that if he were to actually if he were to actually fall for a plan where she was under his thumb, that would be worse. And so it was a no-win situation in a lot of ways. So yeah.
And then we have Orlin who's just going around the outer rim, enjoying his travels.
Hmm.
Very fun with humor in that character. He's just like, I care, but um, I don't want to be dressed up. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. He's sort of the classic, like there's a little bit of that, he's the guy with the muddy boots who like would like get to know the people and help a new planet work well with the Republic by truly getting to know the people. And he's so not into the let's hold our champagne and clink glasses and make deals, and like that's just really not his thing. And so they worked so well together because they were able to balance that out. And when you have a relationship like that, where one person has a strength and the other person has a strength, it causes weakness in the other person because they don't get to exercise some of these really uncomfortable skills that they need to have. And so she was sort of like, no, I trust you. You're good. And then like she gives it all to him, and he is probably very uncomfortable with it, but realizes that he can step up to the task. So it was a really fun interaction between those two. Whereas interestingly, they're not actually talking to each other for the vast, majority of the
they're
so
just thinking about what the other person could do. Or I guess in the beginning of the novel, it starts off with a fake transmission. So it looks like they're talking to each other, but they aren't.
exactly. So yeah, but that was also a really great dynamic that I got to play around with these two, because it's two chancellors. It's like a really unusual thing, right, in this universe. So
Circling back around to Axel, he does grapple with a lot of his other interpersonal relationships as well with Gela and then Binno. But I noticed that Binno did briefly appear in Convergence. So was that one of the characters that was like introduced kind of barely in Convergence and then made its way to
mhm.
Cataclysm? Okay,
Yes.
I was curious
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. He needed to have an appearance in Convergence, so he didn't just like pop out of nowhere in our book. And Zoraida very deftly wove him in to where he needed to be, which was great. But yeah, I created him out of nowhere. I was just decided like I need a bad guy and I need him to be really bad. um, and I was like, how bad can I make him? I'm like, I'm gonna make him like really, really bad. So he's the ultimate, like, power hungry, evil guy who feels like a friend, maybe isn't.
I
So
guess it's difficult because he feels like a friend in that he was the companion when Axel was lonely, but now it's being used in a really emotionally manipulative way.
yeah,
So,
it is. And I think it's very telling because I think everybody has childhood friends, and some of them will become lifelong friends and some of them don't. Because the truth is that people change over time. And so just because you had this like really strong camaraderie with somebody as a child doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be able to rely on them as somebody that you intimately trust once you become a grown up and once the push and pull of adult reality really sinks in. So I wanted to play on that because I think there's a lot of people who stay incredibly loyal because they have these shared memories. And that has to change sometimes, and very painfully so in this case.
kind of pairing the opposite direction, but so there's characters like those two that have a long-standing relationship that's affecting the way they interact with each other. But then we have Ziri and Fantu who are quite literally married and they don't really know each other that well. So how did you go about writing that? Because it's a very different dynamic, so to say.
It was, and I wanted to. It's really fun to be able to write this part of their relationship because in so many books it's sort of about people aren't getting along and then they figure it out in the end and they get married and that's the end of the book, right? Nobody gets to do the epilogue of like after they're married. Guess what? Sometimes like after the newlyweds sort of they're getting along great, like the couple years after the wedding can be really, really tough because you have to live with this person. You have to learn how to give and take and compromise. And I wanted to illustrate the really not fun parts of post marriage not bliss, and they're still, the one of the best ways to do this is like, well, let's just throw their planets into conflict again and make it really, really, really hard for them. But not just that, but like I wanted their interactions to show that they have a lot of stuff that they still have yet to work out because they barely know each other when they get married. I mean, they know each other enough to know that like they're willing to do this and they can probably partner with this person. But
But it
when you
wasn't a
read
love match initially.
yeah, exactly. I mean, this was a marriage of convenience for so many, reasons. And but there was mutual respect, thank goodness. And there was romance that really kindled towards the end. But now that they're actually married, they are going to realize that they're very different people. They grew up differently. Fantu was not originally royalty. He's a commoner who came into the house. And then and Ziri's a warrior, so she's got like a military warrior, she's a pilot mentality, and she has a way of doing things that is not necessarily going to clash very well with somebody who's, you know, um, now her husband. So I played a lot on what I could imagine conflicts would be between the two of them, and had to figure out how to roll that into the conflicts going on with their planets and stuff. So that was fun. That was a little difficult though. It was hard to do.
Do you have any like just pure speculation of what happened to them after Cataclysm? Because the book happens in such a short time frame that we don't really see what happens to them. They're just like, yes, we're gonna sign a new peace treaty, but they haven't actually signed it yet.
Right.
So,
I believe, I don't know if we're going to do a spinoff from this. And if we do, then I probably shouldn't talk about it. So I, if what I would imagine, so I can't,
of course.
this is not set in stone. So I'm just imagining, but I would imagine that they would actually stay married. Um, and that there would be peace between the planets between them because they would work really hard to make that so. Um, because at some point in time, their parents were going to give up their authority and it's going to be just Siri and Fontu really leading their planets. And with those two in charge, I think that the peace would be fairly solid. They would still fight all the time here and there.
But it wouldn't be as deadly or loss of
No,
life.
no,
Okay.
I think it would be now minor stuff and not like, severe interplanetary stuff. But I think that I have a feeling that they have the foundation for strong marriage and for peace for the two planets. That's what I believe. So yeah. I could be wrong. If somebody else writes that out, like, too
Maybe
bad.
they just end up breaking up, or one of them.
I don't know. I really hope not, because I love some happy endings. And I think in this case, I feel like they had it pretty dang rough in Cataclysm. So I would like to hope that they have peace and, maybe even have kids. Who knows? We'll see. So yeah.
all this all this is set so far before the original, so to say, Star Wars universe though. So we get
Mhm.
to see a lot of characters like Yaddle and that are just well, they're a bit younger here, so they're able to be in on the action. So what was writing her like? And that didn't she have a younger girl with
Yeah,
her?
so she's also with a youngling, Sippa. And I, oh gosh, I had so much fun writing them in. At some point in time, I think there was like a little voice inside my head that was like, Lydia, you're writing way too many characters for Cataclysm. Like, you have so many characters in this book. Are you sure you should be doing this? Can you like juggle it all? But I wanted Yaddle so much to be in this book. I knew that I had an opportunity to put her in, and I really just wanted to have fun with it. And I tried to imagine what her, what she would, because she's a Jedi master, so she has a lot of wisdom. She's got a lot of experience, and she works with a lot of younglings, and so she clearly has an ocean of patience. Um, so I wanted to put her in, and I wasn't sure how much to put her in. And luckily, I got the encouragement that I got to do as much Yaddle as I wanted to, so that was awesome. And I thought, okay, what's going to actually frazzle Yaddle? And I'm like, we need to have. I was thinking like I need to put a youngling in here that really pushes her to her limits. And so that's how Sippa came to be. So Sippa is a really preternaturally gifted youngling who needs like sort of more one-on-one training because she's so gifted. And so and the Arcanians are sort of typically seen as a little pompous, a little like full of themselves, like we are a superior species kind of a thing. And so I wanted to bring some of that feeling to Sippa's attitude, and see how Yaddle kind of dealt with that. Now, that being said, so that was fun. I adored those scenes that I got to write together. It was just sheer joy to write them. Um, that being said, like I did worry a lot. We all worried a lot. We were like, there's a child in the middle of this war, and that's not to be taken lightly. And so we did have to tread very carefully about how we were going to portray scenes with Sippa and how Sippa was going to deal with the war and the aftermath and seeing death and destruction and being part of that. That was difficult, but I made a very conscious choice to keep her there, because as we know,
Anakin
wars
was in a
happen.
war.
I
I
know.
mean, at 9 years, yeah. So he was in a war too as a child, so it happens.
Absolutely. And like, let's be honest, is that every war that's ever happened on this planet is not devoid of children being in the conflict, either as fighters sometimes, or as just being victims, or just, passive observers of the horrors that go on. And so I thought it was only fair to leave her in, but be mindful of the fact that this is a difficult subject. So yeah.
So some of the other unique characters you got to introduce was the droid that Enya was fixing for VOTG. How did that character come about?
So one of the goals I had when writing Cataclysm was that I wanted to include elements of the original trilogy that I love so much, that I think everybody who is a Star Wars fan loves. Um, the aerial dogfights, the funny droids, the companionship of droids, the occasional humor, the occasional romance, um, and the triumph of good over evil. And so there were these really classic themes of Star Wars that I was like, I want my book to feel like it's a reflection and an homage to the original three movies, by having all of these different things. And so 4VOTG was going to be that scrappy little droid that just wants to be a good droid and just wants to fulfill its duty to be helpful and to be and to have a mission and to have a purpose in its life. And it's going to be, and it was going to be clever and like, and like, you know, figure things out and do stuff. And I loved, so 4VOTG is faintly named after one of my children. I'm not going to say exactly how because for privacy reasons, but yeah. But that's, yeah, TG is definitely one of my favorite. I feel TG doesn't get enough like love. Like people don't ever mention TG, but like TG is one of my favorite characters writing. I loved writing him.
Uh, well, I'm sure we can write the Wikipedia article on the droid, and then maybe it'll get some more visibility.
That would be lovely. I would very much appreciate that.
Um, but if you could see any of the characters that you have written about or that you first introduced appear in live action or animated, who would you like to see?
Oh my gosh. It would be really fun to see more Yaddle. Yaddle and Sippa, that would be really fun. They're just a fun dynamic. Um, let me see. Probably Oren. Like a writing that him, like he was so funny and like his dad humor, it was just like just came to me. It was just meant to be. Um, so I would love to see him because he's a hilarious guy. I loved writing his character. I don't know. There's a bunch for sure. Like I'd love to see Kyung like actually
In
in real
action.
life. I with the headdress and like the regalia. Oh God, I would love to see that. So yeah.
There's a beautiful scene, I guess, where all of her aides are just shocked that she's not fully dressed out and she's out of her dressing chamber. She's just like, get me whoever this is that I need to talk to, get me them now.
Yes.
Um, um,
I love that scene. I remember very distinctly writing that because so much of who she is like she's so carefully crafted down to every single detail. Like if she's meeting with Irem and Arano, she's wearing Irem pearls. She's wearing Arano like, you know, fire rubies. Like her outfit is perfectly reflective of the kind of work that she has to do to work with many different planets and keep them all happy. She grows like in her hothouse, she grows like native plants from all the different planets so that like when people come to visit on Coruscant, like they're welcomed with something that reminds them of home to show like these little tiny details. And her makeup and her headdress, which is from her, also a lot of her jewelry is from like, you know, the Greylark, you know, estate, right? All of it is armor. Every single bit of it is armor. And for her to be so shaken out of this formality, and when somebody's sort of like, oh my God, like, you know, Chancellor, your makeup, and she's just like, makeup. I love that scene. It just shows you how much she's so raw in that moment that she was
just
like,
throws it
this
all
is
away.
me. This is me peeled back. This is me at my like, you know, I'm rolling my sleeves up and I'm like getting to work. And that was that transformation of being able to take her all like just peel away all of the jewelry and the headdresses and like this gigantic like 50-pound gowns and all that kind of stuff and just like put her in like Republic, you know, soldier clothes and like get her a blaster and stick her hair in a ponytail and get her on that ship was the most enjoyable thing I have ever written in my life, where she's just getting down and dirty and she is like she's switching places with you know, with Malo, right? She is now boots in the mud in the field doing the hard work, even though technically she's not chancellor at the time. And that reversal of places was very carefully thought out. And I very much enjoyed letting people see her in her elements and without all of the
The stuff.
stuff that she hides behind, which is what many politicians have to do. They hide behind their armor in
I guess
various.
they both hid their grief in different ways because obviously she was grieving the loss of her husband. She just did it differently than Axel did. So
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody deals with grief in a different way. And, you know, for hers, it was just like work, work, and more work. And the work is always important. And this is going to be more important than everything else until it isn't, you know? So, yeah, absolutely.
Um, and the last question I had about Cataclysm was, we do see a lot, some of the faint elements of hyperspace buoys about how communication, it takes a really long time. They have EX droids because things take forever. Did you work at all with the authors writing some of the junior novels? Because they focused a lot on the whole hyperspace aspect of everything.
Mhm. Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about how the buoys were going to work, how communication was going to work. It was really fascinating to be able to go back in time with this sort of prequel and look at how like it used communication was not just always there. Like it had to be figured out at some point, and this is a time where it was still starting to piece together, but it was very fragile. And as you know, when communication doesn't work, things go very, very sideways. And so we did have to work with, the authors that were doing the middle grade novels, the YA novels, just but on a larger scope. It was a huge part of the thinking behind phase two, and knowing that that might be a problem. And so that was a big part of what we did. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, in some of the recent short stories for Tales of Light and Life, we see are introduced to a new Padawan and his master as he explores Coruscant, going to the underworld. He's kind of uptight Jedi, and then he just gets dragged into a club, and he's like, "Okay, well, I'm just gonna go have fun now." How did you get inspired for that?
So that was really fun. So Amadeo, such a fantastic character. Um I wanted to, so this is the first young adult that I've written for Star Wars. And so I was like, I got to really immerse myself in like, okay, now if I was a very young Padawan and I was now in this flashy city that I've really never fully explored, even though he did some of his early training at the Jedi Temple, but like, what would you do if you were a teenager just sort of set out on the streets in the middle of the night in like one of the biggest cities in the world? Like somebody says like, here you go, it's 10 p.m., drops you in the middle of New York City, and you're like, what am I going to do? Right. So I had a lot of fun with that. And I had to make sure that I put some questions in Amadeo's mind about kind of who he was and what he wanted, which are, I think, honestly, questions that we all ask of ourselves at every single age, right? But they really they're just a lot more prominent when you're coming of age. And so, yeah, those thoughts are on his mind, and he gets to see a little bit of a life that could be his if he wanted it. The question is, what does he want? And so that was the question we really focused on for that
It's
story.
really enlightening to see a Jedi that's not quite as worn down, because a lot of the Jedi in other High Republic books, they're all beaten down. They're just like, oh, we've been fighting the Nile for years now, and he's just like, oh well, I'm on Coruscant. Let's just go into a club. And
Yeah. Exactly. And I love how Miro Locks, like his master, is sort of like, not back yet. Like, should I be worried? Should I be worried? And he's sort of like asking nobody. And he's like, just gonna
and then he
trust.
shows up the next day, and he's like, well, you're not dead, so
Yeah, I
that's
know. He's
fine.
like, you don't smell very good. He's like, go take a shower, which I think is a really funny thing. So I thought that was fun. And again, this was another one of those like stories. Like I'm very mindful of like I want to put some humor and inject a little bit of humor into these stories. I want to put some of that exciting stuff that like gets people excited about Star Wars to begin with. Every time I put pen to paper. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. I very much enjoyed writing that one.
Were there any like minor characters that you enjoyed putting in? Just any ones that you remember?
I don't know. I think we've mentioned most of them. I mean, I don't want to say that they're minor. I don't know if there's any like
I guess
really,
they only appear in that one short story, so all
in
the
that
people that he
short
meets in the
story.
club, yeah.
Oh, I liked Alice's, I think it's Elise. It's spelled like Elise, but it's basically like Alice. I loved Alice's character because um, she's just so like, she's kind of like scrappy, but also very, very street smart, but also very elegant. And I really love her character, and I can totally see her having her own little adventure, as a non-Jedi person on Coruscant, like sort of getting involved in all the intrigues that can happen in that planet. So yeah, I think Alice would be a great character to expand upon.
That kind of parries into my next question, which is that there's a lot of Jedi and Sith in Star Wars, but there's also a lot of ordinary people like Joss and Pika.
Yeah.
What's been what's it been like exploring their story? Because they're not going around necessarily fighting with lightsabers or anything, but they're still just existing in this
Yeah.
war.
Yeah. I think that's one of the best things about all of the Star Wars Insider shorts that we've been doing, the serialized fiction, is they all focus on non-Jedi. And I really love that. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons why there has been a lot of love around a lot of the Star Wars streaming shows that really focus on non-Jedi. And I think part of it is because there is a lot of push and pull that happens in a human or other species mind about how to deal with these gigantic conflicts that are happening when you don't have any special powers, right? There's a lot of drama and stuff that happens in every single character in this galaxy that are these smaller stories but incredibly important. And so Joss and Pika have been really fun to explore after. So their stories all sort of happened in the original Star Wars Insiders that came with Phase One. And so I got to sort of pick up on their story and like learn about them and what they're like. And I got to sort of, I'm like, I'm going to throw a wrench at them. Let's like make things a little difficult. Let's make things really difficult for them. I mean, I think that's our job as authors, is to kind of torture our characters a little bit and see what happens, right? You like brew them in the pot. We're like, we're going to throw in this conflict and stuff and see what happens. Will they rise to the task, or will they sort of, what kind of low will they hit before they rise to the task? So yeah, I love writing about them. I loved being able to create a couple new characters. That has been really really fun. So yeah.
And that's the thing about being a Star Wars fan, is that there's so many characters out there. If you could write something about a character of your choice or topic of your choice, what would you want to write?
Oh gosh. Well, I have a background in medicine, so I would love to explore more stories that had like a medical background. So something along that vein, I think would be a really fun, unexplored area to write in. But I'm not exactly sure. So yeah, that would be something. Um, there's just such a wealth of stuff in the universe that I feel like there's many things that I would continue to like to expand upon. So I don't know. I have a lot of different ideas and I don't want to get too into them because they don't really, I think I'm probably not allowed to talk about them.
Totally fair.
Some secrets have to stay behind closed doors. So we'll see.
But it should be interesting if you ever do get to write about like some doctor out in the frontier or something. So we'll see.
I know that would be fun. I would love to do that. But in any case, I still have 21B. I have him on my shelf and he's near and dear to my heart because we are fellow practitioners. So I kind of love that we got to do that. Just neat.
So do you have any upcoming works coming out that readers should keep an eye out for?
Sure. So there are going to be a total of 5 issues in Star Wars Insider that explore Joss and Pika in the occlusion zone. So Tales from the Occlusion Zone are going to be coming out for the next 2 issues. I think the last 2 issues are coming out. But definitely if you can pick those up, you do need a subscription, unfortunately, but at some point in time, they will make their way into a compilation like this. This is George Mann's work that he did for Phase 2, and all the stories in here and all the Star Wars Insider articles involving us, the High Republic, are also in here. There's Zoraida. Hello. So at some point in time, it will make its way into all together here. I will be doing 5 episodes right now, 5 episodes that are going to finish up, I think, in July. And then starting in December, I have 4 more issues coming out. So there's more to come. So that's very exciting. So still writing all that, and that's very fun.
Yep, I'll tell our listeners to keep an eye out for that. So thank you so much for sitting down with us today. It's been a pleasure. Wookieepedia really appreciates all you do.
But I
Um,
very much appreciate everything that Wookieepedia does. Thank you guys so much for the tireless work that you do to keep things updated in there. And it's oftentimes I'm sure it's kind of thankless work, and what you guys are a huge resource for the community and for all of us. So thank you so much.